am Kultapiisku and this is Blueprints. And last time we made it to the room 46 for the first time. So now we are the owner of this villa. I don't know what's gonna happen the next day. Is there something different today? There's new leather. The music is so different. Look at this. Open only in the event of inheritance. Dear Baron, welcome to Mount Holly, your home. I still remember the first time I was addressed by my title. I was quite a bit older than you, but it still felt strange, especially after a lifetime of hearing my father addressed daily by the same title. But life is a journey of growth, growing up, growing older, growing wiser, and in our case, growing into the Baron of Reddington. The Baron doesn't have to be a daunting figure. He could be quiet and unassuming, or loud, crass, and boisterous. He could be deceptive or trustworthy, humble or boastful, or any measure of other things, but always clever. When I inherited Mount Holly, I never had to prove myself. They just gave me the keys and left it at that. It felt too easy, too trivial, and very undeserved. Experience comes with time, but without validation, I spent the better part of my youth questioning myself. And as I grew older, that lack of conviction and aimlessness amplified. I never really had any goals or objectives to strive toward. I never had any dreams to realize. I never set my sights on something beyond the horizon. I never had a room 46 to reach. And now that you have reached your goal and are basking in your well-deserved glory, shiny trophy in hand and showered with accolades and titles, will you be content to stop there? Or will you look to the horizon and wonder what dreams lie ahead? Ovin Neveray, Herbert S. Sinclair. Trophy. You have been awarded the Inheritance Trophy for reaching Room 46. Trophies earned will be permanently added to the trophy room. The Inheritance Trophy in recognition of completing your bequest. Trade. I was wondering when I stopped playing last time, I didn't get any achievement from reaching the room 46, but it seemed like I had to really take the trophy of my accomplishments to my hand. This feels great. I see that we have something different in here. The trophies of Mount Holly, a recognition of outstanding excellence. Okay, so nice. We got something new to try to achieve. Let's see. Full house trophy. Draft a room in each open slot of your house. Explorer's trophy. Complete the Mount Holly directory. Bullseye trophy. Solve 40 dartboard puzzles. A logical trophy. Win 40 parlor games. Trophy of invention. Create all 8 workshop contraptions. How many have we created? We got the shovel thing and the hammer thing. Then we got the thing we could melt things. And then we got the super lockpick. But we didn't know how to use it really. Have we created anything else? I think that might be it. I think we have 4 out of 8. Okay. The next trophy. Trophy of drafting. Win the drafting strategy sweepstakes. I don't know what that means. Trophy of sigils. Unlock all 8 realm sigils. Yeah, we got 1 out of 8. Trophy 8. Solve the puzzle in room 8 on rank 8. Room 8 on rank 8. What does that mean? Do we... Right, we haven't found room 8 yet. So is that a room that can only spawn in rank 8 then? We got the inheritance trophy. Dare bird trophy. Reach room 46 in dare mode. Curse trophy. Reach room 46 in curse mode. Day 1 trophy. Reach room 46 in 1 day. Trophy of speed. Reach room 46 in under an hour. Does it mean like in-game hour? Oh, if it means that's like... I suppose it must mean that. That's gonna be tight. Trophy of wealth. Buy out the entire showroom. Yeah. Diploma trophy. Ace the classroom final exam. Oh, we need to be building a lot of classrooms. Trophy of trophies. Complete the trophy. Okay, so yeah, we need to complete all the other trophies. Interesting. And besides that, we also have wait. There was 8 letters in red envelopes, and we have only found 1. We got 1 envelope picture right here. So yeah, we still have a lot of work to do, and I'm not sure how to start our journey really, but there has been a lot of times when I haven't been really sure what to do, and then we just start building and see where the path takes us. Usually it takes us to some very interesting places that are full of mysteries. But first, we're gonna build this room with tool shed, trading post, shelter. Let's take some tools with us. We got the metal detector and magnifying glass. Wash helper. I'm wondering if there's something hidden somewhere in here. I need to turn on 2 lights in the balcony over there. 2 of the wolves have been in that room. So I'm wondering if if the other 2 are also in there. Oh, new room! Mount Holly gift shop. Souvenirs for sale. Is this unlocked only when you reach the room? Oh my god, look at this! The Red Prince. Enjoy your lunch. Oh, plushies! Blue tents. Tents fits for a prince. Sturdy construction, steel stakes and scouting rope included. Base size 6 times 8. 40 something height. Dry finish, water resistant treatment. Nice. Hey, 46. Mount Holly gift shop. Thanks for visiting. I love that the crest is blue in here. Walk-in closet. Mount Holly D. A permanent addition to walk-in closet. It just looks nice. Lunchbox. A permanent addition to the dining room. When you reach rank 5 with lunchbox, gain half of your dinner steps. Nice. Swim trunks. Permanent addition to the pool. A pair of trunks is always handy for swimming. Just be sure to bring some keys. Oh, that's interesting. Can we start with swimming? Very cheap locks. Home console edition. Over 10,000 sold in Nuance. The Smash arcade hit. Coming soon. Okay. Giant Swimbird plushie. A permanent addition to master bedroom that we haven't found yet. Unlock. Dare mode. Where can we get these modes? From the main menu? I suppose. Okay, then we got blue tents. That's the same text. A permanent addition to the campsite. Blue tents can only be purchased after you have proven your merit as a scout by obtaining 8 trophies in your trophy room. Oh my! We got still a lot to do in here for reals. Okay. Should we just buy one of these? Or should we save our swim trunks? I'm gonna save some money right now. We still got 2 books to buy. Oh! Battery pack. Corridor, den, pantry. Pantry would be okay, I think. I'm just gonna go now. I'm not really, like, sweating this time we reached the room, so that's nice. Now we can just chill for a bit and then after that, when we get some new things to do, then we start thinking a bit more. Now I just want to have a chill gaming session and see what I can do. Chapel, I don't want to lose my coins. I'll come back in here later. Should I just buy this? No, I want to have the swim trunks. Workshop, classroom. I'm gonna make the workshop. Then I'm gonna build in here. Oh, we could also get some books if we rather. No, we got a new book. I forgot that I got this. The Curse of Blackbridge by Redford O. Ewing. Forward. The legend of Blackbridge is one that's well known to the people of Grand Realm, but versions of this tale have been passed down for generation. With each new telling, the story has changed, becoming over the years more colorful, more verbose, and, as one might expect, increasingly horrifying. However, with so many renditions and unique personal touches, the task of confining and binding this tale to text seemed an ambitious and impossible challenge. Over the course of my research, I have heard dozens of variations of the legend, and while the details would often change, I was surprised how much of the story's heart remained the same. Yet, the more I listened, the clearer it became that there could never be a definitive version of this tale capable of capturing all the wonder and myth of Blackbridge. In the end, I chose to write down what felt most authentic, the story my grandmother told me as a boy long ago. Part 1. The Berry Picker from Oris. Let me flip through my... Oh my gosh, this is such a long book. What is going on? This is the longest book in here we have seen so far. Oh my voice is not very good yet, so I wonder how I make reading through this, but hey, let's try. Alright, part 1. The Berry Picker from Oris. Many years ago, before peace had become a familiar word, there lived a group of rogues so wayward that the locals deemed it appropriate to call their number the Unholy Hounds. They were feral outlaws composed of society's worst in a time when society was at its worst, and for each crime that fearful travelers credited to the group, a dozen more lay unclaimed, each worse than the last. For the gentry, however, who often value their coffers more than their companions, no crime could measure more wicked than the group's primary enterprise, highway robbery. One such member of this so-called band of rogues was a boy of 13 years, Jesper, who had not been lucky in life, having lost 2 brothers to war and parents to famine. In the years of hunger that followed, Jesper lived in a gutter behind a churchyard, relying on the nourishment of scurrying bugs and weeds harvested from the cracks of the alleyway to sustain his pitiful existence. It is not surprising that a child aiming to escape such hardship would take any easy road out. An easy and well-traveled road paved with temptations, leading out of the city and into the lands, where loose purse strings entwine with the strands of salvation and glisten equally with the hope of opportunity. It was this road that eventually led Jesper to the end of his youth, a hidden cave at the bottom of Blackbridge Canyon. It was here that he met his surrogate family and saviors, that notorious gang of godless outlaws known as the Unholy Hounds. Despite the hardened circumstances that had led him to this vocation of banditry, Jesper was surprisingly tender-hearted and was often teased by the group for being too kind for such an ignoble life. For this reason, Jesper was assigned the innocent role of berry picker. It was not just innocence that set berry picking apart from the gang's more wicked undertakings, for it was the only duty performed without the safety of night's concealment. Jesper, no stranger to solitude, did not protest that he alone worked, while the others slept soundly tucked away in the cave at the bottom of Blackbridge Canyon. On one such occasion, Jasper decided to get the early start. He left the cave, berry basket in hand, and set out into the woods before the morning sun had even brushed against the palace treetops. It was colder in the morning, but the headway down afforded meant Jasper could reach the furthermost berry patches without worry of being chastised for tarrying upon his return. It took over 3 hours on foot to reach his destination, and along the way Jasper had passed by many a familiar bush, all priorly village, and so bereft of berries that one would have to dedicate several moments in earnest examination before finding a single one. Jasper was patient, but even patience has its limits. He was confident that even accounting for the time lost to this long stretch of travel, his efforts would be well worth the pains. Surveying the patches in this new grove surprised even Jasper. The red dots suspended among the leaves seemed as numerous as stars in the skies. Upon seeing such a bounteous sight, he clutched his berry basket tightly and nearly toppled over out of joy. Once he had regained his senses, Jasper quickly made a decision. He would not reveal the location of this newfound treasure. Instead, he would earn the respect of his confederates who, upon seeing his yield, might attribute the success to hard work. Smiling at his plan, Jasper set off to fill his basket and was making steady strides in this task when the sound of thundering hoofs interrupted him. A carriage. A carriage is approaching. The thought of it made Jasper freeze. Had he been so enchanted by his discovery that he had neglected to observe his surroundings? How could the roadway be so close? He ducked down and crept toward the impending sound, hiding behind one of the larger bushes nearby. It was only a moment more before the sound source revealed itself. Within 50 paces of where Jasper hid, an elegant carriage with gold trim came soaring around a corner of trees, led by 2 beautiful white horses, and conveyed by a stern-looking driver seated atop the vehicle, flaunting the most sophisticated regalia Jasper had ever seen. It was not just any carriage, it was a royal carriage. Even without ever having witnessed such a sight before, Jasper was certain. The sight had so transfixed Jasper that he stood awestruck, unable to tear away as the carriage approached. The little concealment the bush provided was soon proven unequal to driver's lofty perch, and upon spotting the boy he pulled the reins with such effect that the noble steed slid to a sudden halt with precise control. "You boy, get out from behind that bush," he shouted with rigidity that betrayed a modest amount of fear. "You startled me half to death coming round the bend of my own tribe, and me seeing such an unfamiliar face in a place where there ought not be any face." Jasper quickly contemplated running. The man was much older, and his dress was suitable for courtly behaviour, not dashing through the bramble and mud. I was picking berries." Jasper raised the half-filled basket up to allow the driver to see the proof of his words. The demeanour of the man suddenly changed. It was a change that Jasper was familiar with. He had many times seen the same stern expressions on the most fiendish bandits melt away when presented with a berry basket. Any suspicions that the driver might have had instantly evaporated, for even the notion of a member of the unholy hounds became very farcical. The softened expression even made allowances for a smile. Berries, eh? Say you couldn't have picked a better spot for them, could you? I used to pick berries here as a boy. Jasper took his cue to finally step forward out from behind the bush, proudly brandishing his basket. I know, and what luck I found them. I have only just begun picking, and look how many I have. It would have taken me fourfold the time back home to procure this number. The driver bent down for a closer look. And where is your home, boy? It must be quite far. Jasper replied with a scripted response. A little south of Tanner Fork, just past the burned woods. My God, that is far. You couldn't have come all that way only this morning. It was true. Tanner Fork was in the exact opposite direction that Jasper had travelled, and while that response would seem perfectly reasonable in a location closer to Blackbridge Canyon, he could see why it might seem less believable here. Sir, I have travelled much farther for much less profit. I dare say there is no distance yet made by man that would not be worth undertaking for a price such as these. Surely you have tasted them for yourself. Jasper felt happier with this response, as it seemed to amplify the man's smile. In my youth, often, but perhaps I took it for granted because I never had to travel very far, and even then, my father would always drive us here in our carriage, so I'm ashamed I never had to walk such a stretch to earn an equal reward. It was Jasper's time to smile. Then let my efforts reward us both today. He raised the basket even higher. A taste in memory of your youth, sir. The driver chuckled and removed one claw, bending over the seat to reach down to the basket. And at the moment his fingers touched the first berry, the dagger in turn met his throat, cutting through a superficial layer of skin and drawing blood. Jasper caught the man's startled eyes. And for that taste, I will have your purse, sir, in memory of my youth. The driver's arm had gone stiff, his chin raised and trembling, more frightened than he had ever been before. Whether unable or incapable of speaking, he did not respond to the boy. Perhaps he did not think his jaw could afford to be engaged at this particular time. Jasper let the basket drop, freeing his other hand to probe the man's pockets. Do not mistake me, sir. I will not kill you if you give me no cause, though I will admit thought of taking your carriage and leaving you the indignity of walking appeals to me. Unable to find a purse in the man's coat, Jasper pivoted to search the seat under him. Why have you no purse upon your person? The driver slowly raised his hand cautiously, pointing toward the carriage door behind him. Jasper lowered the knife's edge a small degree to allow the man to speak, which he did in turn softly. There's a lockbox in the carriage. Well, come down then, and grant me the courtesy of sparing your life and binding your hands, a concession I assure you of my tender heart, for it would be much easier to slit your throat. The man started to comply, slowly lowering himself from the driver's seat of carriage. Once down, Jasper guided him away from the carriage to a nearby tree, where he instructed him to get on his knees and put his hands behind his back. Excusing his inexperience, the man indulged Jasper while he figured out how to adequately bind him. The smile and kindness Jasper had seen on this man's face, now nothing more than a distant memory. In their place, cold, dark eye displaying no emotion. I wonder, should I grant you the same clemency you are showing me?" Jasper stopped, surprised by a question, but ignored it, secured the final bindings, and then hastily returned to the carriage. With one hand on the door's handle, he turned back to the man. "If there is no lockbox, there will be no clemency." Inside, the carriage was surprisingly dusty and unswept, a stark contrast to the elegant and polished golden facade of the exterior. It had apparently been many years since a passenger had enjoyed passage in this vehicle. This all but confirmed what Jasper had suspected. The driver of this carriage was not a liveried servant in the employ of some creator master. Any curiosity that this observation might have further produced was quickly abandoned upon seeing what rested under the carriage's back seat, a large wooden lockbox. Despite its hefty appearance, the box was surprisingly easy to handle. Within a few minutes, Jasper had dislodged it from its hold and carried it out into the sunlight. Inspecting the box carefully, two observations were made. Totemic symbols found carved on all four sides of the box hinted that the box was very old and likely not created by Orindian hands. It reminded him of artifacts from the old world and was presumably crafted in one of the ancient realms. Secondly, box was secured by a rusted yet robust padlock and would not open easily without a key. Jasper looked over to see the driver quietly observing from his indentured position. "Do you perhaps have a key you can provide me to open this box?" Without emotion, the driver replied, "There is no key to that box." Jasper stood up. Easy enough then. He headed over to a nearby rock of sizable dimensions and lifted the stone up, carrying it back to the box. If there was ever a time when the lock had been resistant to brute force, it wasn't recent. With one hit, the stone had completely shattered and rusted the lock. He bent back down and opened the lid. Inside was effigy, a crude figure chiseled from stone. Without too much deliberation, Jasper bent down and picked it up, somewhat surprised how heavy it seemed given how light the box had felt. Having expected to find something more akin to gold or gems, he looked questioningly at the man, hoping to find an explanation. The driver's smile had once again returned. "You're cursed, boy, for deadly is the stone. You have opened that which should never have been opened, and you are cursed." Oh. I clicked off of it. Here we go. Jasper carried the effigy over to the man and showed it in front of his face. "What is it?" "That's one." Feeling his disappointment rising to anger now, Jasper tightened his grip on the effigy. "One what, you mumbling agenter? And in God's name, why have you no purse upon your person?" The man did not seem intimidated. "One pace." He paused for effect. "12 more and you will be dead." He only had a second to flinch before the effigy struck him in the head and put an end to his cryptic ramblings. If there was ever a time when the old man had been resistant to brute force, it wasn't recent. Jasper looked down at the sculpted stone figure, nose splattered red. Was it cursed? Was he cursed? He had of course heard stories of curses and had never doubted their validity in the past, but now he was standing face to face with the possibility of being cursed. His mind pleaded with him to be skeptical. And if he was cursed, what difference would the knowledge make? A dozen more paces would not be enough to find another living soul, to say nothing of the chances of procuring a remedy. If he did not move from where he now stood, he could live maybe another 3 or 4 days, maybe more given the abundance of nearby berries. A plan that, if we ignore its obvious faults, might provide additional opportunities for help to come along. But what good would that do? To be discovered here, beside a body, stolen goods in hand, bloated from berries, and raving about a curse that could very well not be real. No, it would most certainly be better to face one's fate now, take a dozen paces, and see if the life goes on. But Jesper found his legs unable to make that first step. His mind was unable to convince his limbs to waste away 1/12 of his life in a single motion. Feeling the desperation sink in, he hopelessly looked about him for a solution. And if, by some stroke of luck, the gods had heard his plea, a miracle materialized before him as he found himself suddenly at the end of a fairy tale. 2 white horses and a carriage of golden trim were beside him. To answer his immediate prayers, he laughed at his fortune and calculated the short number of paces back to the road. 4, perhaps only 3 if he jumped. He made a quick survey to see if there was anything he wished to grab before taking the plunge. He thought about removing the driver's fancy coat, as that appeared to be of some value, but the additional risk of undertaking such a task too great to change. And so, after a profound breath, he took his second, third, and fourth steps, though they were quite large. Seated now behind the horses, he reached for the reins and suddenly realized that he was still gripping the effigy. If the curse was real, then it would most certainly be better left here. If, on the other hand, the story was fictitious, there might be some appraisal that could be made of the figure. It was, after all, found within a lockbox, whose typical function of secures objects of value. Having witnessed firsthand the horrors of destitution, Jesper found his mind equally reluctant to allow his hand let go. If it is cursed, I die. If not today, then tomorrow. And if I die, what care have I? And with that statement said aloud to the horses seemingly, Jesper took up the reins with confidence. Whew. So, calculating the steps seems familiar. Part 2. Below the Black Bridge. Miller awoke to some light nudging from a familiar foot. Only one person would have the cheek to awaken her in such ill-mannered fashion. Shaking the sleep from her eyes, she glared up at him in the darkness but did not say a word. He nudged her again, teasingly, then stepped back into the dim. After taking a moment for her eyes to adjust to the darkness of the cave, Miller remembered. She was on third watch today. Quietly collecting her things and wits, Miller turned as she left, waving to her young friend, who was more than likely already asleep. She crept through the cavern's main passage, careful to not wake the sleeping bandits around her. Like a hero in a book, she often mused. Quietly she grabbed a bow from the haphazardly formed pile of weapons, shaking the accompanying quiver in the darkness to assess how many arrows it held. She then walked toward the sun-drenched mouth of the cavern, ready to start her shift. Above her, in one of the few trees found in the canyon, Miller could see that Ravia was already posted. She waved and Ravia waved back. Calling out to each other was strictly forbidden. Anything louder than a gesture in the canyon was forbidden. When Miller reached the tree, Ravia lowered a braided rope and pointed to the ground behind her. Miller turned, following the finger, and saw a pail of water resting beside a nearby log. As he turned back to Ravia, nodded, and secured the pail to the rope. The pail went up first, and in turn Miller followed. Ravia reached across to grab the water. Miller leaned back to give her space. There was not much room for maneuvering in this three-post, a necessary concession for the concealment the outpost demanded. Ravia tilted the pail up to her mouth, dramatically illustrating how thirsty she had been. Miller laughed silently as water poured out, splashing onto Ravia's face. It was a bit too daring and noisy of a joke, and had the others been around, they would have certainly been scolded for the unwarranted sound. But Miller appreciated the efforts Ravia took to verbalize the silence of the morning. They had been on third watch together for over a month, and during that speechless time their friendship had grown into something special. Affection was unsurprisingly scarce among the unholy hounds. She had felt camaraderie before, of course, but intimacy never. From their elevated vantage, the girl could see both the concealed entrance of the cavern as well as a clear view of the bridge that spanned across the canyon. Black Bridge was the link between the Gentrylands and the northern mountains, the overpass that connected Oris and Reddington. To the city-faring travelers of the realm, the bridge was an unavoidable crossing. In the day, the task was to ensure that travelers passed by without stopping. At night, the task was to ensure that they do. Like most of her band, Miller preferred the night. The biting glare of the sun might be tolerable to farmhands and bricklayers, but to a cavern-house bandit it was a source of constant annoyance. In the day there was no shroud to conceal her expressions nor to hide her thoughts. She felt exposed. Ravia touched her elbow and pointed up. Miller, striving to suppress a budding smile, subtly shook her head in response. There were many signs that the unholy hounds used in lieu of words, but two of them had developed an extended vocabulary. Gestures quietly forged in the shared solitude of their mouth among the branches. She watched as Ravia shifted, placing her palms flat on the floorboards beneath them. Miller knew what she was trying to say, but shook her head a second time. It was often more fun to pretend not to understand. Ravia rolled her eyes and turned away, looking back to the canyon. Squinting through the leaves, the two girls held still, watching and listening. It was not long until Miller, too, heard sounds of approach. Ravia held up two bent fingers, and a few moments later two men emerged from the bridge's southern end. They were dressed in a familiar uniform, long grey coats with black facings, white waistcoats, and black tricorn hats. They belonged to the local patrol, the Blackguard. Although not an everyday occurrence, their presence at Blackbridge wasn't an unusual sight. It typically indicated an important traveller's impending passage across the bridge, information that the girls would promptly relay to their leaders as soon as the coast was clear. But this report, while exciting, was rarely acted upon. In Miller's 5 years in the Unholy Hounds, she had never once seen a carriage taken in open daylight when the Blackguard was nearby. The men had nearly reached the bridge's north end when Miller heard the horses, faintly at first, but growing louder with each passing moment. Ravia's eyes met Miller's, the same concern mirrored in each other's expressions. This did not sound like the typical carriage, cautiously approaching the bridge to cross. Instead of the familiar crunch of the highroad's gravel, they heard the harsh clattering of hoofbeats against stone. Both girls quickly redirected their attention downwards, looking through the foliage. The sounds were not coming from the high road, but from the canyon itself. The horses were coming from below the bridge. In an instant, Miller had nocked an arrow and drawn her bow. Go. Ravia was gone before the whisper had even left Miller's mouth. The young scout was already sliding down the bank below, racing toward the cave. There was no road that ran below the canyon. There was no reason for numerous horses to be approaching their cave. There was only one reasonable conclusion, and both girls had reached it instantly. The base has been compromised. This was a Blackguard attack. The moment the horses came into view, Miller let loose her first arrow. She was surprised to see a carriage. She had expected cavalry. Before she even finished processing the thought, her second arrow was in the air. Without a trail, it would be unthinkable for a carriage to traverse such a rough terrain, yet she watched as the wheels jolted over the rocky riverbed. A third arrow was now in flight, and there would be no need for a fourth. The driver slumped over just moments before the vehicle dipped into a small ditch, slamming into an embankment. The force of his sudden halt immediately shattered the front two wheels and catapulted the driver from his seat. Utterly confused now, Miller quickly glanced over her shoulder to see if any horses were also approaching from the rear. Down in the canyon, the entire horde of unholy hounds came spilling forth from the earth as if hell itself had suddenly sprung open. The group seemed even more bewildered than Miller. Half asleep and tripping over one another in desperate attempt to engage an unseen enemy in combat. Miller could see Ravia among their number, the only one looking up at her. Her expression was chilling. There would be no need for a silent gesture to convey what they both now realized. They had made a mistake. The gang's chieftain, Geoffrey Hertzlasser, led the others, cautiously approaching the crushed carriages like a suspicious fox would near a baited trap. There were no words exchanged as the group crept forward in customary silence. A dozen or so paces in front of the wreckage lay the far-flung driver, an arrow protruding from his broken body, and beside him a blood-stained effigy carved from stone. Miller was inconsolable. Jasper had always been her favorite. He had always shadowed her in the night, clinging to the hems of her every move, the way a child tails behind an older sibling. Tender-hearted, she had always called him, though deep down she had known that wasn't quite true. His appearance of gentleness concealed raw, resilient durability that emerged in the most perilous of situations. He had been a flower among the nettles of his cave, but he still had thorns, honed by a grim past and 100 hands of misfortune. They buried him in the darkness in the back of one of the larger cavern rooms. He was interred with a berry basket and a silk handkerchief that he had treasured. The mysterious effigy they had found beside him served as a distinguished gravestone, a marker that stood out as somewhat special among the rows of similar sword markings neighboring plots. No one spoke, not even in whispers. There was nothing to say. Miller awoke the next day, with thunderous shaking and rattling of the earth, a far cry from the playful nudging of the previous day. She strained to adjust her eyes, but the choking sting of stirred-up dust caused her to flinch. Panic was also in the air. The sound of scurried footsteps and the clattering feet filled the space around her. But even in alarm, the silence was louder. What was it that sounded so strange? Miller closed her eyes tight and used her feet to guide her along the passage. The whispers around her were getting louder, and intense voices could be heard ahead. Louder speech than she had ever heard spoken in the canyon. A growing dread grew as Miller approached the mouth of the cave, her eyes now open wide despite the dust. Shouldn't it be day? Miller felt a hand in the darkness, pulling at her. It was Ravia. Too embraced, and Miller did not need to see her to understand. Ravia placed two bent fingers against Miller's cheek. And with that touch against her face, Miller felt the same sinking feeling from the previous day. Two bent fingers confirmed what Miller had suspected. Girls had forgotten to relay one critical piece of information to the others. An hour or so later, the screams began, blood-curdling cries of hopeless desperation. Captain Frederick Lee of the Blackguard looked down from the ridge of the canyon to the collapsed entrance of the cave. "Ah," he grinned. "Now they speak." Such a grim story. What is up with the story? What is the meaning of this? What is the... I'm afraid. Am I like... I'm afraid that I am also cursed now. I'm afraid that I will also die after 12 steps. Oh. Inheritance. Temporal records. Longest day inheritance 5, 11, 15, 5. What does that mean? Resource records. I wanna see. We have solved 33 parlors and 15 dartboards. So yeah, we're gonna get the parlor trophy soon. Yeah, we need to find more sanctum keys and more letters. Upgrade discs would also be nice. Anything in here? My favorite floor plans. Bullshit. Yeah, I have drafted that many times. Most drafted 10 storeroom corridor. Most time spent in library entrance parlor. Contraptions I have made. Oh, let's see. Oh, I have made 5 actually. So we got the burning glass, power hammer. Right, we got the lucky purse as well. Then we got the jackhammer and big sound amplifier. That's nice. Maybe one day, foyer. Yeah, I would really love to make the foyer. someday, and then the Great Hall. Highest grade in classroom 5. I wonder how far can we get? Is it 8 since if we build the outer room classroom, then we are getting 8 classrooms added to our drafting pool. Do we need to build all of them? That's quite a lot. Ooh, this is making me dizzy. Well, I suppose I have to go back to this book sometime. Oh, we got the bookshop. We got so many things to buy. Do we wanna try to get a lot of money and buy books and gift shop items, or I think I'm gonna take wine cellar and go for the diamonds. That's always nice. Let's say for the gift shop since that's new and exciting. Broken lever. Anything else? Oh, some money in there. I suppose we cannot ride. Oh, we can make this again. Yeah, let's make it. Maybe we find something new and exciting. Can light candles and ignite fuses. Not very good options, but that's sometimes what happens. I kinda wanna save the courtyard for some place where we can get both of the stores, so I'm gonna make kitchen. But I'm gonna go this way first. I was thinking, now that we are the owners of this house finally, can we... Do we now sleep in the master bedroom? We don't have to sleep in the tent anymore, right? So is it that only after we have inherited this house we can find the master bedroom? It was supposed to be in East Wing, so I think we wanna go to the East Wing and see if we can get it, and of course this happens. We're running out of steps, really. But I'm still gonna take the items, maybe we can craft something. Oh, just these. Is the basement door always gonna be open now? Since we found the key, or do we always need to get it back? That's what I'm wondering. Nothing in here. Greenhouse. We can get more diamonds from there, I suppose. Yeah, let's make the greenhouse. Two diamonds, nice. Can we use the broken lever in here? We can! I wanna go back there because I wanna see if we go there and like the next time we go in there, if we're gonna get like if we can actually get in there, because first time we got in there we got the cutscene and we weren't able to like explore the room ourselves. And I want to believe that we can explore it ourselves. This box is empty, this box is empty. This puzzle is harder than it seems. I don't like this. This puzzle is harder than it seems. I don't know, I think this seems very hard. How can I solve this? If this is true... These are lies... No, if these are true... Are they just in here? This is just... This is lies, so they are just here. Yeah. Don't try to confuse me like that. It's mean. We got so many gems. But we are running out of keys. That's not very good. Kermit powder. Right, we also have the saves that I haven't been able to open. No! So what are we gonna do now? We're locked in here. Should we go outside and try to figure out if we can do something with our new tool? Oh right, and we need to buy something. Buy something from here. Yeah, we don't have that bookshop, so let's spend our money. I think the lance box is the choice. Wait! Oh no! This is because we read the book right. Cursed coffers, a permanent addition to the shrine. None would dare to open it. So does it mean that if we buy that and then we open that, then we will have only 12 steps? before the day ends or before we die. That's quite harsh. Well, nothing more to do in there, so let's throw a coin in there. Then I just wanna go here for a moment and see if there's anything I missed the last time when I was too eager to get to the room 46. Yeah, this is open now. That is great. That is good to know. No keys to open any more of those chests. But I realized that even if we raise the water level there, we cannot use the boat, right? Because that is way more up than that one. Maybe if we got the pool and we have the swimming shorts in there, maybe we can swim to there? Or can we go there some other way, maybe? Also, what's the purpose of... Wait. Wait! When did this happen? I'm confused. Did this like go up when we did something in the tomb, maybe? Right, this room. Nothing to do in here. No, we cannot get in there anymore. Wait, is there some other way? Huh? Really? Am I just confused? Yeah, this is certainly confusing, so we really need to have the tomb to get in there. Alright, well... This wasn't very interesting day, I feel like. Well, we got one new room when we read the book, so that's something. But yeah, I think there's nothing more but call it a day. East wing favored. One new room. That's great. Okay, I'm actually gonna end this episode now. My voice is not very well, so I don't feel like I should be talking this much right now, but thank you for watching and see you in the next one. Bye bye.